Before this video begins, I would like to give a quick thank you to my Asbantium level patrons Fallon Cortez and Nathan Gibson. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Hello everyone and welcome to the first video in a new series I'm starting where I go through every modern episode of Doctor Who and choose one or two things to make a lore video about, since there's interesting stuff tucked away in every single episode. Naturally, we're going to start with Series 1, obviously, specifically with the episode Rose, because that's where it all began. I thought I'd kick this stuff off with a video all about the Autons and the Nestene Consciousness, the villains of the episode, because there's a lot of lore there in the 50 years since they first appeared in Spearhead from Space. Of course, there are going to be a lot of spoilers specifically for the stories on screen now, so consider that your spoiler warning. And now, without any further ado, let's take a deep dive into the history of the Nestene Consciousness. So, to start, what actually is the Nestene Consciousness? Well, according to the book Synthespians, at the beginning of our universe, a being named No, I'm not saying that second part. Crossed over from the previous universe when it ended. In our universe, she realised that she and her kind were basically gods. When she arrived, Shub was pregnant and gave birth on the planet Polymus in the Mutter Spiral Galaxy, also known as the Milky Way Galaxy. The planet was far from a red star and all life on it was destroyed when Shub's child completely infused the planet, giving rise to what we now know as the Nestene Consciousness. The Nestene Consciousness is a disembodied life force, both a hive mind race and an energy-based singular entity with a specific ability to possess plastic itself, animating it and making it almost organic because the Nestene's molecular structure is very close to that of plastic. There's no single physical appearance of the Nestene because it can exist in all sorts of forms and places. It exists within everything it controls, especially the energy units used to move the consciousness, along with the Autons it uses as physical minions. But that being said, the consciousness can manifest itself as a single squid-like creature serving as a central brain of the Autons, but it could also manifest itself as the same kind of plastic an Auton is made out of. Indeed, even though the Nestenes were usually made of pure energy, they could still take physical form through possession of things like Autons, dolls, bins, rubber ducks, and even inflatable killer chairs. The comfort is to die for. In the early days of the Nestene Consciousness back on Polymus, their appearances were those squid-like creatures, although after they became beings of pure energy, they actually challenged the Time Lords themselves, as mentioned in Pandoric's box. This war broke out in the constellation of Cephin in the Ilia Galaxy, which was close to Gallifrey itself, but Rassilon's forces were too powerful and contained the Nestenes within the galaxy, although this actually just doomed the worlds of Ilia to become Auton factory worlds and protein planets for the Nestenes to grow more powerful. However, Rassilon later used the super weapon The Moment to completely wipe out the galaxy and all life inside it, including the Nestenes and their slaves, although some managed to survive. Despite this, the Nestene Consciousness was a far cry from the incredibly powerful juggernaut it once was. This reduction in power didn't stop the consciousness invading countless planets though, now free of the galaxy. Under the leadership of the Nestene High Command, which is itself pretty vaguely defined, only appearing in the Terror of the Autons novelization, the consciousness invaded planets for 1,000 million years, including Kramodar and Plovac 6. These invasions were for a few different reasons, ranging from colonization to complete destruction, and also to use the planets as food sources for plastic and protein. A Nestene invasion is pretty simple and strategic. First of all, portions of the consciousness would be sent through space within hollow spheres called energy units, which appear like meteorites when they land on the target planet. These energy units can control plastics on their own, but the goal is to combine them all for full effectiveness, like Exodia the Forbidden One. The next step is to take control of a local being, with the Swarm Leader unit creating either a facsimile of this being or a completely original being and then creating other Autons to collect together the other spheres. Gotta catch them all. Once these units are brought together, the consciousness can be grown within an environment tank and then take on a form perfectly adapted for conquest of the planet it has landed on. But let's backtrack a bit. What is an Auton? The Autons are robots usually resembling plastic shop window mannequins, animated by the Nestene Consciousness as soldiers and servants to do the bulk of its work for it. Although to control larger numbers, a transmitter is needed like we see with the London Iron Rose. The Autons aren't the only creations of the Nestenes, but they're the most significant and common within the show. Not every Auton is a robot, instead just being made entirely of plastic and brought to life by the Nestene to control. Indeed, the Mother Consciousness exists within every creation, all the Autons actually containing a fragment of the consciousness itself. Larger fragments could be used to entirely copy the memories and brain patterns of a human, allowing for the Auton duplicate to completely pass itself off as the original person, kind of like a Zygon I guess. In fact, as we see in Spearhead from Space, Swarm Leader Channing contained enough of the consciousness to essentially give him feelings and some level of sentience and individuality, despite one being an Auton and 2, not even being an Auton duplicate of someone that actually exists. Autons aren't really designed to look lifelike most of the time, with robotic movements and the ability to change the shape of their limbs and body at will, so they are incredibly versatile. They're also incredible trackers, with powerful hearing and the ability to hone in on other beings simply through brainwaves. The Autons are relentless in pursuit since they never tire and have no feelings, so things like terrain, distance, and weariness don't matter to them. In the same vein, Autons are difficult to fight because bullets have almost no effect on them, so any attempt to send in unit or the traditional military is a pretty bad idea. The Autons also have hidden wrist guns which are incredibly powerful, firing concentrated energy bolts that tear matter apart at a subatomic level, including the ability to totally vaporize targets. The wrist guns in Rose were even more advanced and could implode upon impact, leaving barely a trace of the human target. However, this doesn't mean the Autons are invincible, because they can be destroyed with the use of specific radio signals, along with intense heat melting them entirely because of all the plastic. You know, I mean, you can make them alien, but they're still plastic, they're still gonna melt. More importantly, if you break the link to the Nestene consciousness by destroying the Nestene itself, all the Autons under its control are deactivated because that link is cut off. Although that being said, if the connection is disrupted, it's still possible for Autons to go rogue and act independently with sentience rather than shutting down entirely. According to the BBV Auton films, which, you know, I'm not personally a fan of BBV content, but they're all fully licensed, so I have to cover them. When the Nestenes first reached Earth in the distant past, humanity hadn't evolved yet. We were still going, you know, like Ooga Booga, caveman, hit rock and stuff. So the Nestenes buried a billion Nestene creatures all along the planet's ley lines, which were areas containing incredibly high levels of psi energy. Psi energy is basically the last surviving remnants of the early universe magics the Time Lords had cast out. Some of these Nestene deposits were destroyed throughout history as humanity did its thing, you know, going from hit rock against wall to hit club against face. Although these areas often became holy sites to humans as our species developed, beyond, you know, hitting club to face to hitting metal hammer to face. As the City of Death novelization claims, during the time of the ancient Greeks, the Nestenes returned to see if the planet was ripe yet, only to realise that they still didn't have anything to take control of, so they popped off back home to Polymus for a cup of tea and decided to wait another few thousand years before checking in again. This takes us to the late 20th century, where everything would change forever as humans finally started to develop plastic, and a lot of it, meaning Earth was finally a fertile ground for invasion by the Nestenes. The first full-scale invasion was coordinated by a swarm leader known as Channing, who is a great example of the Nestenes creating a more realistic and sophisticated human body from scratch to infiltrate a planet and sow the seeds for invasion. Channing took ownership of the company Autoplastics, mass-producing Autons to be placed in shops all across Britain before they were activated. However, this was actually a two-pronged invasion, because the other part of the plan was a contract with Madame Tussauds creating Auton waxworks of key military leaders and government figures, including British Army General Scobie, whose plastic duplicate was created to take his place and command the British Army to soften resistance against the shop Autons when they attacked key strategic positions. You can see the imperfections in the plastic Scobie, with an unnatural plasticky yellow tinge to his skin, but he was close enough to work for this side of the plan as long as the real Scobie was kept alive to maintain the copy. Again, kinda like Zygons. Channing hoped to grow the Nestene consciousness at Autoplastics so it could take over the world fully, although the newly regenerated Third Doctor and Liz Shaw were able to destroy the manifestation and shut down all the duplicates, which all reverted to the appearances of basic Autons upon destruction. A few months after this incident, the Nestene attempted a second invasion as detailed in Terror of the Autons. This time the Nestene was working alongside the villainous Time Lord, the Master, to carry out their plan, which involved creating Autons to distribute plastic daffodils to the general public, which would be activated by radio waves and suffocate all the humans. The serial also shows us that the Autons could simply wear a plastic mask to appear human, rather than, you know, being a full-blown copy. Although this method was less convincing and more of a short-term solution. It also reveals more of the Nestene abilities, like heat-activated dolls it could use for covert assassinations without any traces, and like I mentioned earlier, killer armchairs. Seriously, I just love this so much. The Master planned to manifest the Nestene at a radio tower, but the Third Doctor convinced his old frenemy to break the alliance because the Nestene would treat the Master the same as any of the humans in the invasion, which therefore naturally appealed to the Master's sense of self-preservation observation. Together, the Time Lords changed the polarity of the radio waves and managed to stop the manifestation, sending the Nestine back into space and deactivating the Autons, although the Master escaped from UNIT like a Saturday morning cartoon villain. The Nestine would attempt a couple more invasions as seen in Business Unusual and Business As Usual, with the Nestine consciousness secretly controlling a computer company called Senanet in 1989, planning on selling a very cheap games console with the goal of using the polymer cables to create a network and transfer its consciousness into every home on the planet. However, it was defeated by the 6th Doctor, Mel and the Brigadier, although they weren't aware that the Nestines had also set up their plastic action figure company, Galaxy Plastics Incorporated. Although as far as I know, this plot point is still unresolved. I guess they just forgot about it. And now we get to those pesky BBV Auton films I mentioned earlier. In 1996, UNIT scientist Dr. Sally Arnold rediscovered a Nestine pod in storage, but when she tried to activate it for experiments, she exposed it to deep space transmissions and it re-established contact with the Nestine consciousness. In the chaos that followed, a second pod was activated and escaped to Sentinel Island, where it tried to revive those ancient Nestine creatures buried in the distant past. UNIT seemingly managed to stop it at the time, but it had actually implanted itself into Lockwood, a cybernetically enhanced UNIT operative, using him to invade the world and affect all the computers. The Nestines once again tried to activate the ancient creatures, although Lockwood sacrificed himself to break the connection and destroy the Nestines, ending the threat in 1998, 2 years after it began. However, according to Plastic Millennium, this wasn't the only 90s-based Nestine invasion. Indeed, at some point in the decade, a very sophisticated and human-looking Auton named Alicia Hammerson set up Hammerson Plastic plc, dominating the plastic market and becoming a significant name in the industry. She threw an extravagant party on New Year's Eve 1999, planning to replace all her guests with Auton replicas so the entire planet could be absorbed by the Nestine consciousness. However, when the 7th Doctor and Mel showed up, they broke the Nestine link and deactivated Alicia before she could carry out her plan. As shown, or heard, in Brave New Town, at some point during the Cold War, the Soviet Union discovered a Nestine energy unit and created Autons to act as spies within the UK, training them in the British-looking seaside town of Thorrington, Suffolk, which was actually in Uzbekistan. You know, a little bit far away from Suffolk. However, when the country gained independence in 1991, the Autons stopped receiving orders from the Soviet Union, so ended up living the exact same day over and over again for 17 years, thinking they were human. This was until October 2008, when the 8th Doctor and companion Lucy Miller arrived in the training centre. It was then that the Nestine consciousness made contact with the Auton villagers and took them over, trying to use them to destroy humanity in typical Nestine fashion. Although the 8th Doctor was able to break the connection and free the Auton villagers so they could live their lives in peace. These villagers were proof of how accurately Autons could become almost entirely human with false memories and actually believing in their own cover story, like we see much later with Rory Williams in the Series 5 finale, and also the book Autonomy. According to this book, back in the 1980s, a young girl by the name of Elizabeth Devonshire discovered a surviving part of the Nestine consciousness in a warehouse and it befriended her, manipulating her into becoming a cold and calculating businesswoman. She set up the shopping and entertainment complex Hyperville with plans to take over the world in 2013. Part of this scheme involved the pop star Auton Shaniki and her superstar football husband Paul Kendrick, who both fully believed that they were human before they were activated. However, Shaniqui would eventually overcome her programming and die in the process of helping the 10th Doctor and Kate Maguire defeat Miss Devonshire, who had become the physical form of the Nestine consciousness. Later that same year, according to unit extinction, 300 Nestine energy units fell to Earth, with the consciousness working with Devlin FutureTech CEO Simon Devlin to conquer Earth with his company's 3D printers. These began printing Autons across the world, and Devlin kidnapped unit boss Kate Stewart to try and turn her into an Auton, although she was saved by Josh Carter, who ended up becoming an Auton in the process. As the physical Nestine began manifesting, the human forces found themselves defenseless against the Autons because all their weapons were made by Devlin's 3D printers, so were essentially sabotaged. The Nestine planned on encasing Earth within a plastic bubble using humans to create the liquid polymer. However, Osgood was able to free Josh from the Nestine control, and together they saved Kate to stop the Nestine, shutting down the Autons with the exception of Josh, who began using his plastic skeleton as a tool to help UNIT. Much further down the line, in the 51st century, when Dorian Maldovar left to help the Doctor at Demon's Run, a group of aliens banded together to rob his Maldovarium, with the Nestene consciousness making a deal with the Krillitane Empire to create a lifelike Autondorium for the infiltration in exchange for a non-aggression pact between the two races. Also, at some point around this time, the Nestenes planted a set of energy units at the planet-sized Omnia Forum, hoping to use shopping as the staging ground for invasion yet again. However, when the business failed, the ion cloud around the giant store trapped the energy units and the Nestene tried stealing River Song's vortex manipulator, although this actually ended up destroying the units in the ion cloud rather than saving them. Even though it wasn't a Nestene scheme, during the events of the Prisoners of Time comic series, the Tremas Master and Adam Mitchell used Autons to trap the Sixth Doctor in 7214 Antarctica Police. Even though the Doctor melted them, what appeared to be Perry was kidnapped by Adam along with every other companion up to that point, with the villains later unleashing an Auton army to destroy the assembled Doctors. However, the Autons were eventually stopped and all the companions freed. Much further in the future though, in the 101st century to be specific, the Nestene consciousness tried to leave Polymus entirely after a Time Lord invasion. Its ultimate destination would be the New Earth Republic, which was a colonised area near the Ant Nebula that had become obsessed with the culture of 20th century Earth due to the television signals only now arriving at the New Earth Republic's Reef Station 1, which refined them and rebroadcast them for this future audience. However, things all went wrong due to one thing: sex robots. Yes, the most powerful businessman in the New Earth Republic, Walter Jeremiah Matheson III, was obsessed with the actor Dominique Delacroix from the series Executive Desires, so he helped the Autons make a perfect replica of her who was in love with him. You naughty boy.
Ooh, you're a real dreamboat.
Billy every teen.
He planned to house the Nestene consciousness within this duplicate, allowing it to escape Polymus and give Matheson a queen to rule the galaxy with. Chaos ensued on Reef Station 1 because of all the Autons and other plastic shenanigans, although the 6th Doctor worked with the Auton replica of Delacroix's co-star Marcus Brooks to trap the consciousness, and Matheson was so ashamed that he shot himself when the real Delacroix confronted him for making a sex robot of her, because, you know, don't do that, man, it's just creepy.
I want you to know that I love you as much as a man can love a computerized image of a gorgeous celebrity. Which it turns out is a lot.
When the last Great Time War broke out, Rassilon approached his old Nestene enemies to create an Auton duplicate of the War Doctor, planning on luring the Daleks into a trap at the expense of an army of Time Lord soldiers. However, the real War Doctor soon found out and obviously wasn't very happy, so he agreed a deal with the Nestenes to take control of his duplicate to save the Time Lord soldiers, whilst also sending another duplicate to go tell Rassilon off, while the real War Doctor stole weapons from the Time Lord armory. The catch with this though was that the War Doctor agreed to one day fight for the Nestene in the future. Due to their involvement in the Time War, the Dalek Handbook classifies the Nestenes as one of the higher species, because they were one of the few entities that could perceive the war and become involved. However, according to Revenge of the Nestene, the bonus chapter of the Rose novelization released by Russell T Davies, the Time War had a very serious effect on the Nestenes, leaving them crippled and weak. They were forced to make peace with the Plastic Conjunction, which was a collection of 17 protein planets farming smoke and oil for the Nestene consciousness. Kind of awkward to, you know, go back to your slave planets and be like, hey guys, no hard feelings, right? The consciousness also developed a romance of sorts with the embodiment of Gris, the mysterious former master of the 5th galaxy. However, when the planet Nestania was exposed to the edge of the Time War, the embodiment was driven insane in a mere second by a blizzard of TikTok. Hey, I'm with you there, TikTok really does suck. The Nestene was de-aged by a wave of early, and all the food planets were destroyed by a cloud of late. Due to the Daleks' Time Destructor, Polymus was also seemingly destroyed during the war, and the Nestene consciousness was left just a little bit annoyed and vengeful. The Time War had further physical effects on the Nestene consciousness, altering its entire body to become made of plastic, manifesting it as more of a liquid form of a humanoid face, like we see in the episode Rose. Indeed, by using warp shunt technology, the Nestene consciousness travelled back in time to Earth 2005, planning on turning our home into its new food planet and weaponising shop mannequins across London. The novelisation elaborates on this plan, explaining that the Nestene consciousness also wanted to absorb the 9th Doctor to steal the TARDIS and invade further planets, which is why Mickey was copied to gather more information on the Doctor. However, due to the Nestene now being partially plastic, when Rose knocked a vial of anti-plastic into the consciousness, it was destroyed. But according to Revenge of the Nestene, a small piece of the consciousness did survive, merging with the corpse of a certain unnamed blonde politician who had died during the Auton attack. It decided to lay low and play the long game, planning on taking revenge on the Doctor, something it managed to eventually achieve when it formed the Pandorica Alliance and imprisoned the 11th Doctor beneath Stonehenge, using companion Amy Pond's memory print to create perfect duplicates of Roman soldiers. This arguably makes the Nestines the most important players in that scheme, because these sleep agents were the perfect trick to lure the Doctor in. However, when the universe ended, the Autons and Nestine consciousness died, only being restored when the Doctor reset the universe, including restoring the Auton Rory Williams to humanity, albeit with his memories intact. And lastly, 300 years into the 11th Doctor protecting the town of Christmas on Trenzalore, a 5 Auton hit squad parachuted onto the planet without weapons to sneak past the papal mainframe. When they were blown off course by the crosswinds, the Nestine improvised a plan to trap the Doctor in Devil's Elbow Canyon in the Outland, which was a dangerously cold area 400 miles south of Christmas. The Doctor and a few humans journeyed there on a boat named the Lifeboat, only to be attacked by the Autons sent to kill him. However, the Doctor stopped them by blowing up the boat with the Autons on board, sinking it into the frozen Lake Lagda, although he speculated that the Nestine consciousness was still in orbit after hijacking another spaceship up there. So that's a pretty detailed and kind of exhaustive history of the Nestine consciousness and the Autons, and I swear I didn't mean for the video to be this long. I guess I just got a bit carried away, and even then I'd had to cut a few things out. I don't have every single Auton story covered. For a villain that is often summed up as just shop window dummies, there's actually a lot going on and a lot to learn about them, despite the Autons only properly appearing like 3 times within the show, with the rest being expanded media. And that's part of why I wanted to start this new series. Even things that are established well in the show have so much more depth and interesting lore hidden away in comics, books and audios, which I feel are often just as valid as the stuff on screen, because Doctor Who has no set canon, and that's something I absolutely love about it. I mean, I don't think the show would have had the audacity to claim the Nestines are descended from an actual Lovecraftian god. Despite the Nestines and Autons not really being close to my favourite villains, I still feel like they're long overdue a proper return, since Rose was quite a basic and broad use of them and didn't really show you much of what the Nestine consciousness was actually capable of. So I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something new about the episode Rose, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. And a special thank you to my Bantam level patrons Fallon Cortez and Nathan Gibson, my Platinum level patrons Maximilian Foreman and Nick Skames, and all my Gold level patrons Boots, Calvin, Daniel Shillito, Franz Horn aka Line Vortex, Herna Verzog, Robert Hock, and Tom Azar. Thank you so much for your support.